Thank you, Will, and thank you all for dealing with about as abrupt a change as you can get from looking at fun, happy soccer games to moving to community management, which is the other end of the spectrum. So I'm Eric Goldberg, Managing Director, Crossover Technologies. I've been in the games field about 40 years, so back when dinosaurs roamed the internet. I am I was an online game designer and built Mad Maze, which was the first game to ever draw 1 million players. And they can't take that away from me, even though the operating system is long since gone to the parts of time. And community is something I've dealt with for 25 years because it spontaneously combusted in the days of the old dial-up services. It was the first time that it made sense. My speakers, the people who are joining me, on my far left and on your far right, which is not reflective of its political positions, is Mario Vasilov, who is the Marketing and Business Development Manager for Imperia Online. Imperia Online is, let's do this in order. It is the largest developer in Bulgaria. It is one of the largest developers in Southeastern Europe. It is one of the 10,000 largest developers in the solar system, but it's also owned by Stillfront, which is a collection of a number of top-performing game companies, including Good Game in Germany. In the middle is Christopher Kosolky, who is the co-founder and CEO of Handy Games. Christopher, like me, carbon dates back to the mobile era, the mobile 1.0 era. He started in 1999. I started in 2000 because I was a bit slow. And they do a range of games from casual, but not hyper-casual, all the way up to mid and hardcore. They are also owned by THQ Nordic, which is another name of power from the console and PC games field. And last but hardly least is Pete McKay, who is the Director of Community Management for Jagex, which of course burst into flame with RuneScape. Pete has been in community for CCP, which was the developer of EVE Online, which did a lot of the seminal work in community. Also for Riot, the publisher of League of Legends, and Social Point. So he kindly has arranged his career so he can give us a lot of different perspectives. So just to talk about community, a long time ago, about 5 years ago, community in games meant that there was a silo in which you had your community, your forum for your game. Since then, community has become has seeped out into the wider world. There are small little companies called Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter and LinkedIn that cause people to get together. And as a result, the outside world has become much more experienced with community than the games field has, and has changed the terms of the discussion. Also, while PC and console, and to a lesser extent console, have been extremely good at developing community, mobile, despite being one of the great communications media, actually has the poorest community, and the panels will discuss what's the changes that are going on there, which is a bit of an oxymoron because mobile starts with a phone, which is a communications medium. And with that, let's start to cover a couple of points, including cross-platform community management. So we claim to our customers, none of the fine gentlemen on stage claim, but other inferior brand X companies claim that the interface between different media, between mobile and PC, is seamless. So what happens when your customers start bitching because they don't think that it's quite seamless? So Mario, you have some of the most, you've addressed the problem by separating the two. But Christopher, you've been dealing with this issue for a long time. So what do you do when customers start complaining that the games don't seem to quite line up the same way?
The problem is really like what the expectation of the consumers are. So we are developing games not only on PC but also on mobile, and partly it's exactly the same game. The funny thing is consumers on mobile always complain that it's not for free, for example, as we are targeting premium games. And even if you tell them that you get exactly the same game for double the price on PC or console, they don't care. So yes, it's price sensitive at the end of the day, and you need to take care about that when you're releasing a game. So normally what we are doing is we're releasing the game first on PC and console, and as soon as it's going down on the prices with all the price, price cuts that you're used on Steam, on the console, and sooner or later, as soon as we see it's coming down to, for example, $9.99, then we are releasing a game.
But that still doesn't solve the problem. The biggest step change in price is from 0 to 1p. So the point is, $9.99 is still higher than 0.
Yes, but what we found out is really like, yes, there was the price point that we're coming from, whatever, $4.99 going down to the 99 race, I would say, and then free. And what we found out, there are some kind of price points where you can really go to. And if you're really targeting the hardcore users, for example, that are pissed about advertisement, but they are able to spend $9.99 without any problem.
So $9.99 is a good, just for the people over here who are looking at, $9.99 is a good price point to get the hardcore customers.
Premium customer.
What about for medium? What about for mid-core?
Midcore really depends. So there is still a market for premium, as we call it. So you're spending whatever $3.99 for the game, and then spending later on as well. So that's good for the mid-core market.
So we're back to mobile 1.0 prices of $3.99 and maybe $4.99.
No, $3.99 plus whatever. It's like 200 euros.
No, but I'm
can
just
be
saying
up there as well.
the initial price. And what about for casual?
Casual is normally still its low price point. So yes, there is a price point for zero or free to play, for example. Yes, there is advertisement there as well. But you really need to target every specific game differently. The funny thing is we have, for example, two different games partly on the store as well. You can find a Townsman, for example, for zero. That is a really free-to-play game. And then you find a premium version as well on the store. I know Google and Apple doesn't like that, but I can tell you it's working. And what we found out is that anyone who is using and buying the premium version are not complaining somewhere. So the ratings of our premium version, what is exactly the same game, just without advertisement, they have way higher ratings. So if you're going up in the price point, you're getting better ratings. Totally crazy.
Right. So the answer is less money, fewer complaints.
Yes.
And thank you for giving the rough guidance to the people over here. Pete, you deal with generally a younger audience, and also you deal on a more persistent game and so on. So when you have to intermediate between your mobile and PC customers, how do you deal with the squabbles?
So, for those maybe not aware, Old School RuneScape, which we released on mobile in October of last year, is an identical product from start to finish to the PC. You can literally stop at your PC, lift up your phone, and continue identically where you were. Graphically, payment, everything around it is exactly the same. Because we're only launched in October, we're only starting to get real data now in regarding number of accounts that have gone through trial and are converting into full-time members. But some of the things that we have found, Old School RuneScape has a polling system, and for maybe those not aware, Old School RuneScape is set up as a stakeholder community, so every player has a voice. When we want to make changes to the game, it goes up to a poll, and every player gets to vote yes or no on whether they want that content or not. With the advent of mobile, we have found that our number of polling participants coming in through, so a brand new community, has increased the polling results by over 70%. So more people than ever are actually having a say. So we've built in functionality so the community can interact directly with their handheld device and start implementing real change for themselves.
By the way, when Christopher seems to contradict himself and Pete used the words identical, these of course are not identical games. The average mobile player uses a smaller screen, I hear, than the average PC gamer. Also, as Christopher pointed out beforehand, the average PC gamer has access to many more channels going on within his PC. What you're saying is the illusion is it's the same instance of a game.
Yes, absolutely. So, as I say, you can close one, pick up the other, close the other, pick up the original. So it doesn't change the experience, so to speak. But you're right, the size of the font, the size of the characters, the size of the interactions do change slightly, but that's only the main change.
So I assume that you hear back from, what is the rate you hear back from your mobile customers relative to your PC customers? You said there's been a 70% increase, but of course, mobile consumption is somewhere, if you looked at pure play instances, it's 10x the number of people who play PC game sessions. So do you have any information on what the percentage of mobile games replying is, or how often they get back in touch with you?
Honestly, off the top of my head, I don't. I can tell you that since we've launched, we've had over 5 million installs. But in order for you to be able to pull, for you to be able to participate, you need to be playing at both a certain level and you need to be a paying member. So you can't come in as a day one free-to-play player and affect a poll about brand new content. So we have set it up in such a way that you need to actually have an investment in the game, in its direction, and in its long-term success before we give you the right to. Imagine you start as day one as a 1-year-old player and we want you to get to 18 before you vote.
You solve all sorts of issues. You stop griefers, you stop the people who say,
Correct.
nice game you have there, you wouldn't want to see a lot of bad reviews.
Absolutely right, yeah.
That's all terrific that you're doing it. Let's move on to the key differences between managing for the different types of groups. So let's start with the most ferocious group of players, the hardcore players from Eastern Europe. Now, I'm not claiming that Eastern Europeans are the most ferocious in the world, but you can go ahead.
No worries.
What are the management issues you get when you deal with hardcore? Because Imperio runs from hardcore to midcore.
Yes, that's true. Basically, the thing is that if you think about it on casual or hardcore, the main point here is when the customer is making a payment. And there is a point when everything is turning and they feel more entitled in a way. So basically, the difference here will be not that big. At the same time, it's a really competitive game what we're having here in Imperial Online. And it's always, for example, when if the game is balanced enough. This is one of the main reasons players are complaining most of the time. And you really need to address it and listen to your community, that's for sure. Even if it's on mobile or on, let's say, on PC, that's why we have mobile and PC separately, because we feel that on mobile, we're getting less feedback. And if you're getting only the feedback from PC and you're treating your mobile users and PC users the same way, I feel that mobile users may feel like they're not listened to enough. So.
Okay, so can you tell us what the difference is between hardcore and midcore? In other words, the extreme players, you know, the people who are willing to, by the way, hardcore, I assume you're looking at, what's your definition, 10 hours a week if they're into the game?
Even more.
So I just want to know a separator, and midcore can be fewer than that. So what do you see with the people who believe that for a period of time that your game is a way of life? What's the key community difference with them?
Between the midcore and hardcore? Or
Yeah, the ones who are willing to put in over 10 hours a week.
basically, there is a thing that the really hardcore players, that when something goes wrong with the game, they were saying that they just hate that they love the game so much. And it was always the case that they were having problems with that, with the new changes in the game. Just it's probably in the human psychology that we don't like to change that much. But if you're going to do something for the not like for the casual players in your game and ignore the hardcore players, probably you will lose some players, but you just need to do it that way. For example, we are having an update which was affecting in a way the casual players, but at the same time we saw that our revenues gone up. So basically you can do that. I mean, you can say, okay, we can sacrifice some users, but if you know that you have a better overall effect, we can do it. So yeah.
So one thing that we discovered going back to 1990, back when the mammals were replacing the dinosaurs on the internet, is the hardcore gamers who love it are actually your worst problem. They like the game. They want you to make it better. They want you to complicate it, and they want to keep, as Mario said, with the same version they've always played, which is a real issue when you have to morph to the new market. You're losing some of the hardcore players. You want to make it attractive to new people. Have you gone through, how old is Imperial Online? I'm sorry, I don't know
It's
the...
already 13 years old.
So you've gone through cycles with this.
Yes, exactly.
So how do you manage your hardcore players being upset about major changes you've made?
Basically, what's most important, you just need to make them feel that they're listened. Because if you don't listen to them, I mean, if you're having problem with one player and you feel that this is an issue you can't address, maybe it's better to ignore it. But when it's growing into a community, you need to address it. And that's what we are always doing. For example, if you're getting a single complaint, we were saying, okay, we can take a look at that. But when we're seeing that it's going into the community, then we need to definitely act. Or you start to lose those players. Because when the community is strong, they start, for example, boycotting your, like they can say, okay, we stop buying in this game. Or it definitely affects, that's how the community works.
Okay, Christopher, you have to manage a range from casual to mid-core. Mario's discussed was like at hardcore and mid-core. What are the key differences for managing a casual and low and lesser and mid tending towards casual rather than mid tending towards hard?
As Mario already mentioned, it's really not who's shouting out loudest is really your hardcore players. I think that's what you really need to understand. Also, we have IPs like Townsman that is, I think we started in 2003 already with the IP. And we always, when we introduced something new, we had exactly the same issues. Like, they don't want to have changes because they were used to that. And yes, you need perhaps to sacrifice that. The funny thing is you don't sacrifice them.
And
so
just-
they are still keep playing the same game. But changes are always difficult and you need to explain why you're doing it. And I think also the funny thing is really like on the new platforms you always see something like, yeah, we want something new. And if you ask the audience, what do you want? Because that's the most funny thing. You don't get an answer on that. It's really like something new. And if you introduce something new, they want something else.
And what's the difference in terms of dealing with change between casual and mid-core?
The feedback. So casual users normally don't know exactly what they want. On the mid-core and hardcore, it's easier because you have more contact and they know exactly what they want. The problem is really like those are, again, a small part of the community. And as a game developer, you always need to know what's your direction. So as you said, if I want to introduce a new platform, if I want to introduce the next whatever big update, a DLC coming up on PC or whatever, it's a decision of the game developer. It's not a democracy at the end of the day where the game developer says the direction. And yes, if you want to jump aboard or just go to another title, that's it. But you need to face it. It's really like, it's our game, we're developing it for the consumer, yes. But at the end of the day, it's our direction that we're going.
Well, you've gone over another major issue. You're the CEO, so you don't have to worry. But the designer, the game designer, could say, "I want to make certain changes," and Mario and Peter, the poor bastards who have to deal with it. You're the CEO, so you get to say we're all one happy company over here.
Funny thing is really, I don't care about the development at all. So I'm not taking care about the product itself. So I'm out there. So the PO is really handling the whole project. So and that's important because my decision is not, I'm not the expert of every kind of game from casual to hardcore. We shipped over 300 titles in our history. If I should be the expert of every single game, no chance at all. Those are the POs there. And they have to make the decision and you as a CEO need to say, yeah, that's my PO, he's taking care about the project. And if it's totally wrong, we can do something that can repair the game.
So if you are a community professional, you want a CEO like Christopher who doesn't care about the product so that he won't
Doesn't
won't
care
screw
about
you.
the product, it's perhaps wrong. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like I cannot be the expert in every single genre out there. That's easy if you have only one game. Then the CEO can be the expert. If you're shipping so many units for games.
This is a big issue, which is the conflict between the community managers have generally been the people in the front line. Let me ask a quick question because for the audience, how many in the audience, raise your hands, have direct or at least partial responsibility that attaches to community? Please raise your hand. Okay. How many people are interested in community and came here because they wanted to learn more about it? Okay. And how many people were at the soccer thing and didn't have anything better to do and they're still here?
No, I think the biggest or important thing about community management is how does the feedback from the community goes to the developers. So we have everything in-house. That saves us a lot of time. So we have some kind of board where we can put every suggestions that the consumers have that is coming to the community. That goes to a big wall. And there is all the ideas that are coming in. It's crazy for the consumers that we really respond on that. And then the team decide if this is a good idea that we should perhaps follow. And I think that's the most important thing in community. How close does the community management works together with each developers or with each PO? I think that's the tricky part in that. If you only collect data and send it to someone in the, I would say, in the dark cloud somewhere, that's not working. You really need to have some good communication.
No, I work with a lot of different companies, whether I'm an advisor or a board member, I'm not a full-time person. And when I introduce the word analytics it was like, get thee away from me, say, back in 2011, 2012. But now the issue is every company cares about analytics, but they still haven't figured out how to distribute it and who has the right to interpret it. It's an issue that differs from companies. You must give, for community to be effective, the community manager must have a say. Now, you've seen that across 4 different companies. So without perhaps identifying which companies do it worst, can you just talk about which works best and perhaps cite 1 or 2 companies and leaving in doubt the one you don't like?
So I'm just going to preface this by saying, when you look at what community really is, and for people who have come today to be, I'm interested in learning about community. Community to me is like being in a relationship. There has to be a lot of open and direct communication between one another. So you are the person within the company who can affect real change for the other, and the other feels sometimes that they're on the outside. So to me, building community communication pipelines that allow smooth access of information, both from the player to you and from you to the player, is a huge differentiator. And in terms of companies that do that well, if I were rating them, I would say Social Point are probably the least reactive. They're much more tailored towards a casual audience. They're free-to-play apps that
Because they're mobile, because they're primarily mobile.
Correct, because they're primarily mobile. They have Facebook pages, they have Instagram pages, but the games aren't built for longevity. They're built very much for a casual audience. Probably in looking at the best, I would say it's probably a tie between Jagex and CCP. As 2 MMOs, they're heavily reliant upon subscribers, right? So certainly until very recently for CCP, there was no MTX. That it has come in a little bit in terms of the ship skins. In terms of old school RuneScape, there are literally no microtransactions, so you are heavily reliant upon that monthly subscriber revenue, and you don't want to be making mistakes that can cost you heavily. So having that open communication, dealing heavily with influencers to become great advocates for you within the community are something that I think both organizations do quite well.
So one thing, for those of you who don't know CCP and their flagship game EVE Online, CCP has had a rough couple of years recently, but they did magnificent work. They were probably, the Americans, obviously me among them, did most of the primary work on community. That doesn't mean the best, but we did the earliest work. CCP, an Icelandic company, did terrific work in community, and also was the first company to hire an economist. It is worth, they have actually published, it's hard to find, there's a great book on how CCP did it, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned from that company. This is not just historical. They figured out how some of these things worked. They figured out how to do a consensual game. They are actually unusual, unlike what Christopher said. They are probably the most consensual game company where the players actually influence the design.
Correct. I would just add to that. I think they were the first company as well to create a player-run console. So players elected in games by other players to become people who would fly to Iceland to meet with development teams and actually talk about what their members wanted, almost like parliamentarians or senators who would come along and represent certain corporations and alliances. This is what we need for the game to flourish. So,
Okay, that was exactly what I was hoping you would talk about, because this is a bit of forgotten lore from Gamesfield. There is someone who is going to do this. eRepublic tried to do something similar. It will be done right, because once you give players ownership in your game, first of all, they're willing to give you a lot of money, but if you don't need that incentive. But second of all, it changes the game. It becomes, if you want a direct marketing relationship, the lessons, no one has done it better than EVE Online in some ways, so it's worth talking about. Moving on. So Christopher, you want to talk about the different social media channels to interact with communities and why some work better for mobile users and some work better for PC ones.
So the thing is really like what I learned in the 20 years that I'm making games is really like there are coming up new channels, possibilities. Check out Facebook, for example. Google Play features, Steam, Discord, stuff like that. That's changing all the time. So really think about if it makes sense. So, and how much time you have to invest into specific systems that are there. And keep in mind that they are changing their policies. And if it's your customer, so for example, there was a huge trend away from boards. Now the trend is going back to boards because it's my customer at the end of the day. What we found out, for example, what works great is that we have a newsletter that you don't have to subscribe to. You're getting it automatically within our games. So we have no problem with data protection and stuff like that, because we ship that to everyone who has our games. Perfect tool, but it's a one-way communication. So really think about a little bit more about you own the consumer, or you can directly contact the consumer, because it's really difficult if the consumer, like for example on Facebook, if you have a fan page, it's crazy what you have to invest nowadays to really communicate with the players. And then they change something like, okay, now we have some Facebook groups that you can do, but again, it's not my consumer, and things are changing all the time. So it's really something what works 2 years ago, and it's funny because I'm at such events quite often for 20 years, and it's really like we see those changing even in the community and how you're communicating with your consumer. It's changing every 180 days. So if you don't like a specific platform, be sure it's gone in whatever 2 years, and something new comes up again. So it's really something that you need to keep in mind. And what we found out, if you have a game from us on the mobile space, you will see that we have our own communication tools in there. It's easy, but you need to have your own, a lot of games. It's not only one game.
So Christopher is talking, is leading into a question that all the panelists are constrained on what they can answer for reasons that will be obvious. So those of you who remember the early Facebook days of social games, when I worked with 2 of the 3 leading companies, they changed the rules on us abruptly and with regular changes. Apple does this to people. Google does this to people. But now there's a next generation of companies like YouTube, like FB Live, and like Discord, and like Twitch. So when your customer is on YouTube, the problem is there's all these walls of text that they're trying to do, all these comments. So trying to take you away from the action. By the way, you're on YouTube. Have you tried this other Google service? Have you tried this other Google service? Have you tried to do this? Discord actually takes
Plus,
over the...
please advertise.
But
Because
please
without advertising, you don't get in front of the eyes of your own consumers again.
So aside from telling people to look at the rules on a regular basis, so Pete, given the straitjacket that you're on, because you're in negotiation with all of these people, what general advice you can give about the fact that for the first time you are actually having to fight a lot of outside people for direct customer attention? What tips and tricks would you give if you're top 2 in terms of managing whoever your provider, your channel is, Facebook, Twitter, doesn't matter which?
Yeah, so for us, the 2 big social channels that we heavily rely upon, both in terms of engaging with the current community. Well, actually, I'll talk about the ones. We use different channels, some for very marketing, so acquiring new players coming in. Some we use for social listening to understand what people are saying. But for community, we use 2 major channels to foster discussion, understand what players are thinking, what their needs are, what is frustrating them, how can we help their quality of life improve. And number 1 of those is Reddit. So our Reddit community is hyperactive. They're quick to call us out when we make mistakes, right? When we don't do things properly. And an example of this that we had in the last 7 months was we had a third-party provider called RuneLite who were making an interface for old school RuneScape. We supported OS Buddy, but we didn't support RuneLite, and the players called us out quite rightly for that. Our Reddit sentiment went from overwhelmingly positive to overwhelmingly negative, so it is a great opportunity for us to hear what players are saying and then to look at data in game and say, is this correlating? Is it matching up, or are we just hearing a roar that's going to disappear in 2 days? The second major channel for us that we use in terms of community and understanding player sentiment is Twitter. It's a place where a lot of old school RuneScape players use it much more than Facebook, much more than Instagram, much more than any other of the newer social media channels. They tend to be Our audience tends to be a little more growing up nowadays, and they use Twitter more than maybe a lot of the others. It just helps them with their discussion.
Mario, what channels does it, so you're at the other end of the spectrum with Imperio, is there, aside from, obviously you use Reddit, I mean, but is there another channel that you wanted to mention?
The thing is that for us, mainly Facebook works the best. And probably the reason here is that we're having an older audience. And let's say that on Twitter, we don't get that much feedback, but on Facebook, we can learn what the players are thinking almost all the time. Also, we really like to use Discord, because Discord is also a way to manage your community really easy. And the thing about Discord is I hear a lot of negative feedback about it. What I think is that probably the most important thing here is to be first there. And it also goes for Facebook. So basically just create your own channel and don't wait for someone else to create it. When you're done it by yourself, even Facebook page, then you have the full power to manage it and to interact with your community.
Okay, I'm going to ask.
I would just add something more, because
Quickly,
it's
please.
important. Yes, it's important to be on the platforms where you're distributing as well. Like, for example, being on Steam, because that is really your community, and you see if this user already invested time in there. And the same thing goes for Google Play, iTunes, whatever you have, because this community really bought your game already, or playing your title.
Okay, we are going to do, I have one last global question, then I'm going to turn it over to you, since we want to make sure those of you who are here for the soccer thing, at least you will get a Q&A out of this one that you didn't get with them. So the one other issue, just briefly, for those of you who look closely at mobile and PC, the level of mobile, despite being a communications medium, is starved for channels of communication with the players. For example, on PC, you have huge Reddit. PC games is a huge community. You have the use of a screen. On mobile, there are some basic issues. Do you want to, Pete? Do you want to cover some of those basic issues, like what the implication of having a smaller screen?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some issues in terms of having a mobile device. Anybody who's worked in mobile gaming knows that if you want to have any social interaction, you have to kill the game in order to go and search it out elsewhere. Certainly some of the things that we're looking at around old school in terms of allowing players to have much more of a social connection with each other and with us, are to, continuing that implementation of the polling system, so you don't need to leave the device. You can go and participate in polls without having to log out and go onto another screen. We're building in direct messaging, so we can message you directly one-to-one if there is something new coming out, if there's going to be any sort of downtime, if there's going to be any sort of communication that affects you, and you can comment back on us. So we're looking at ways of not having you drop the game in order to go and search for something that you want to see in the game.
Okay, just for those of you who aren't aware, I would normally recommend WeChat, because in China, almost all the games and other activities have moved into the messaging layer, the equivalent of iMessenger. The reason I'm going to say it's a cautious recommendation is you have to be able to read Mandarin, which I'm not assuming that all of you do, and I can't myself, but we need to see that happen in mobile, and there's some players out there which I would suggest keep in, because mobile just has not had people invest in community promotion, and given that it is the dominant form of gameplay in the world, we will be seeing some of that in about 12 to 24 months, and we don't have time to cover that and some other topics. I want to turn this around to questions from the audience. Please raise your hand and let me know what it is, and please try and keep your question to 2 sentences, because the speakers are over here rather than over there. So questions from the audience, and you can take any community relation, including one we haven't covered. In the back?
Which channels do you include directly to your games, like in the client?
So which do you include directly in the client? Do you mean some of these games are not client games? Do you mean like apps, or do you mean? Okay. So are there any, do you include any communications channels directly in the app or the client?
Not in the client, no, just on the home web pages, so it would all be factored in there. It is something that we're definitely going to look at, the ability to just click on Discord and join a Discord channel. The problem with Jagex, and I don't mean to be mean here, but the tech is extraordinarily old. It's based on an 18-year-old engine, and sometimes getting that integration can be a little tricky, and we need to balance dev resource time versus inputting social channels versus inputting new content.
Mario, what do you build into Imperial Online, if anything?
Actually, we have distributed our game across different social media like platforms, and it's not gonna work if you just constantly start putting connections to, let's say, other channels and so on. So basically, we're trying to have it like maybe redirect the community to Facebook, but it's not that we're integrating something specific in the game.
Right, Christopher, do you have an answer that's other than we don't?
So really, no, we do, but we redirect them also out of the application. So really directly means normally you need to update that very regular, and that's a problem. Because if they having an SDK update, what, for example, Google Play have very often, or even a Discord or whatever, as soon as they change something, we need to change it. We don't have one game, we have a lot of games. And changing that over all games is a pain in the ass.
Yeah, a very good question. I said earlier that mobile is primitive. This is a good example, since the answer to yours was almost nothing. But PC used to integrate it much more, and the problem is PC, you're either a game developer or you're a communications manager, and a lot of the PC games that used to have, like all the major MMOs used to have it, but now they don't, just because you can't keep up with modern needs. Next question.
Has a community boycott ever had a noticeable impact?
For our games, we have always managed to tackle the issue, but I guess you remember what happened with EA, like in recent months. So basically, that was, yeah, they really here made a big mistake. And as I mentioned, what we are always doing is trying to show the community that we are listening to them. And after we know what we want to say and how to act, then we react.
Pete, can you elaborate? You talked about the revolt that occurred in RuneScape, and and since you guys have successfully navigated it, can you talk about what was necessary to tame the lion that you had unleashed?
Yeah, so I'll actually talk about two things very quickly, one around League of Legends and one around RuneScape. So back when Twitch was really kicking off as a streaming giant, League of Legends dominated in terms of what people watched on Twitch. It was at one stage something ridiculous, like 55% of all Twitch content was around League of Legends. And our esports team decided to put out a notification saying that if you're streaming League of Legends, you're not allowed to stream any other game. And this led to a massive revolt among both players and streamers saying, why does Riot get to dictate? Clearly we're providing the marketing and the publicity and the eyes. Why would you do that? So it took around 25 people to walk directly into Mark Merrill's office and call bullshit on this. And Mark actually had to go out and make a public apology saying, we don't have the right to tell you what you can and can't play. So, you know, if you want to play some, you know, Hearthstone while you're waiting for a game to go, we really don't mind. In the RuneScape one, we had a relationship, sort of contractual, with a group called OS Buddy. They were building an interface for old school RuneScape. So think about it like a new looking client whenever you go, with different functionality. And that was a paid service the players would pay for. Another player came along and made a completely free version called RuneLite. And we didn't handle that situation well. Because we had the relationship with OS Buddy, we neglected RuneLite. We pretty much borderline stopped on saying you shouldn't use RuneLite until players started getting very emotionally upset. We have a CSAT score where our player satisfaction is generally around 97% per day, and that was dropping down to below 80% for a continued period of time because players got legitimately and quite rightly upset that we would show any sort of favoritism. So we completely reversed that decision, embraced RuneLite, and now we support them as we would any other third party.
And with that, unfortunately, we got two very good questions, which we had people very well qualified to answer. Thank you very much, Pete. With that, we're going to have to sign off. I'd like to thank Mario, Christopher, and Pete for contributing over here, and I'd like to thank you all for coming.